Of all the games in the Star Wars franchise that takes place during the Clone Wars saga, nothing was quite as unique as Star Wars Republic Commando. Released back in 2005 for the original Xbox and PC, it gave players a unique perspective of an elite commando squad of clone troopers, the soldiers employed by the Galactic Republic to fight the Separatist forces, or the side that the Jedi are on versus the side that the Sith are on. Though I'm sure Star Wars experts will give you the better history rundown than I ever could. A game that combines the sort of tactical military espionage of something like Tom Clancy, but set in the Star Wars universe. It was a campaign that was not only unique amongst the many Star Wars games that came before it, but also an awesome FPS shooter for its time. As the best of the best among the clone troopers, Delta Squad was a tight-knit group of highly efficient elite clone commandos who could get the job done. They're the ones that could take on a mission that would normally require a battalion of clone troopers to complete. I also want to say maybe the equivalent of one Jedi, maybe 1.5? It was an amazing tactically light FPS game where commanding your squad and working together made the difference in completing a mission. Being able to infiltrate bases, defend areas as a group, or take on hordes of droids, it was a very thematic game that made you proud to be a clone trooper alongside your band of brothers. As someone who got to consume a lot of media involved in the Clone Wars saga, I did enjoy its more military-heavy focus within the Star Wars universe, especially thanks to a certain Battlefront game and the Clone Wars cartoon, made by one Genndy Tartakovsky. I'm a be real though, it's Captain Fordo who put some respect on the clone troopers. You should totally look him up. So when Republic Commando came out, not only did it fulfill my wish of being an elite clone trooper, it was also just a great FPS game to play. But with 20 years gone by, holy shit, I'm getting old, and the FPS market having evolved a lot since then, does Republic Commando have anything in its tank to still be relevant today?
You are my brother, Anakin!
Republic Commando can basically be described as a military covert operation story set in the Star Wars universe. It begins, well, at birth actually. Look at me wiggle my hands. Where we play as a clone trooper of Jango Fett, the famous bounty hunter whom all the clones are descended from, and his training to become a clone commando. His team, designated as Delta Squad, consists of 6'2", aka Scorch, the funny one.
Did I miss anything important?
No. Did you get the data?
Yeah, they searched me, but I hid the data pretty well.
Where exactly?
You don't want to know.
4'0", aka Fixer, the smart straight man Tsukomi one.
Sir, we're gonna split up for the drop, but we'll meet you at the RV on Geonosis. See you planetside, sir.
And 07, aka Sev, the guy who looks like he went to Yarnum.
What's that smell?
As Delta Squad, your mission takes you to a few theaters of war that actually takes place parallel to the movies, like the first mission on Geonosis from Episode 2, or even the Wookiee homeworld of Kashyyyk in Episode 3. Much of it was originally meant to be tie-ins to the movie plot points, generally something along the lines of helping destroy the space will dramatically improve the war effort against the Separatists, or destroying a particular ship will turn the tides of war. It's more of a fluff tie-in that only exists in the game itself, and not even the movies acknowledge it. Kind of like how Rogue One was a side story tie-in to the original trilogy. As far as coming back to this story, I enjoyed going through it again. Not so much for its plot points, but really the thematic storytelling of Delta Squad itself. Sure, there's not going to be a lot of plot intrigue or reveals that would be considered amazing pieces of writing, but it's the mood and atmosphere in which the game creates that I think really helps it hold up. The banter between the squad and their reactions to any given situation during a mission is as organic as Clone Commando brothers get.
But we lost contact with her over 2 weeks ago.
This is nowhere near Corellia. Have they gone rogue?
Not likely.
Respectfully, sir, it could be a trap.
Indeed it could, Delta 40.
There's a strong sense of trust and respect that they share for each other, and it makes them feel like an invincible band of brothers that no enemy could crack. Well, especially because they have the power of quick save and quick load. They're very calm, cool, and calculated with the way they carry out their missions, and that's what still makes them worth listening to.
Delta, begin door breach.
Initiating breach maneuver. Setting detonator. Clear.
Grenade thrown!
Door breach, let's move.
They're also just surprisingly funny, in a way that's a little unexpected for what most people think of clone troopers.
Was it red, red, green, or red, green, red?
And he's supposed to be the demolition expert.
They're definitely what makes the mood of the game, even to the point, please skip here if you want to avoid a reactionary spoiler that I'm about to make, that I was a little sad about the fate of one of them. Sev! You were my boy Blue! Red, actually! See? Sev is fine. I heard that he's not actually dead in some later pieces of media, but I kind of tuned out at that point since I was mainly interested only in the game itself. Also, the commandos are pretty savage about how shitty you are if you're not pulling your weight as a clone.
What a waste of good genes.
Not to mention how crappy they make you feel if you accidentally friendly fire.
Sir, you're a waste of good genes.
Emotional!
It's also just how well everything fits into the Clone Wars style saga. While it might not be so meaningful for people who don't really have an interest in Star Wars, for the fans, it's as good as it gets for this style of game. Being a trooper, riding in a LAAT gunship, mentions of the clone homeworld of Kamino, fighting everything from the B1 series all the way up to the super battle droids, it's being in a Clone Wars story that gives the game's premise a lot of identity, and it takes advantage of it very well. It is not without its faults though. Republic Commando suffers, just as it did on launch, from being way too short. Actually, it's considerably short considering most story-based FPS games nowadays. There's only 3 real acts that Delta Squad goes through before it abruptly ends in a cliffhanger that's meant to potentially tie into another game, which sadly never happened. No wonder fans of this game are thirsty for a sequel, or even a remake, me included. But if military tactical espionage is an interesting setting for you, as well as the Clone Wars premise, Delta Squad will win your heart with their rambunctious and very lethal personalities.
Move out!
Republic Commando employs a mix of basic FPS gunplay with a simple but heavy use of tactical commands that 3-8 can issue to his squad. It's a basic system in its approach to the weapon shooting as well as the way you command the squad, but it's the situations where everything comes together that made it fun back then, and still plays pretty decently well today. Its core loop has you running through levels with a small but varied arsenal that you can use depending on what the situation needs. Your blaster functions as your automatic weapon, but can transform into a sniper rifle as well as a grenade launcher. Your 4th weapon slot is used for whatever weapon you find in the environment, ranging from a Geonosian laser cannon that's actually pretty devastating, to a basic and extremely shitty submachine gun. Don't pick this crap up, seriously. You also have a pistol that is extremely weak and only really gets used when you run out of ammo on everything else, or blasting the basic droids with just to save some ammo. You also get a variety of grenades ranging from EMP styles, general explosives, to flashbangs, which can be extremely useful in certain situations. You also get a melee knife that is considerably more powerful than it looks, and also comes with squad compliments when you successfully get a kill. The squad commands generally fall into 2 types, squad formation and position. Squad formation affects how Delta generally moves about the battlefield, such as making them take an offensive formation to hunt enemies more aggressively, form up to follow your lead, or secure an area to defend. The positional commands lets you use certain parts of the battlefield, such as setting up a weapon position behind cover, breaching a door, slicing, aka hacking a terminal, setting up an explosive charge, or making them go to a healing station. These ones are level dependent and only appear when you come across them. There is one more command, which is the concentrate fire, where you select an enemy to have your entire squad fire on them. It's a very simple system that doesn't feel all that complicated to use, and the AI is actually very smart and quick about following the commands. Well, 90% of the time. What makes it fun though, and the parts that still make it feel unique as a game today, is how all of them come together. Generally, you'll almost always be commanding your squad to take up positions on the battlefield nearly every chance you get, because the AI is actually very effective at using the weapons that they are told due to their aim and the fact that they don't use ammo. Must be nice. Often, you are given situations where you'll have to defend an area, or one member has to take time to plant an explosive or slice a terminal while the rest defend him. This is where positioning commands make the biggest difference, as well as some creative freedom on the player's part. For example, knowing that the AI has better aim than you, as well as having the benefit of infinite ammo, you could be the one to splice the terminal while the squad covers your back. Alternatively, if you'd rather shoot, you can have your squadmate handle the task while you take on the enemies. This is where the commands have a bit more player agency in how you want to handle a major task that involves the whole squad, and it makes for some fun creative situations for the player to handle. Another aspect about the game that I thought held up quite well was how tanky certain enemies are. Because the game purposely makes you effective as a squad while making it difficult and often risky to handle certain enemies alone, for the most part. Using the concentrate fire command is imperative in defeating these tougher enemies. It makes the squad gameplay feel even more important and impactful because if you use it effectively, enemies will go down faster and you won't have to waste some of your own resources that you may need for other situations. I like this mechanic a lot, and I was glad that the game offered a decent amount of tanky enemies to make the concentrate fire command feel impactful, even more so when you make your squad mates take up weapon positions. Retrospectively though, I did wish there were a few more boss type enemies or situations where you could rally the squad to have more engaging fights and skirmishes. The most surprisingly fun mechanic that I didn't really think about until I played this game again was actually the grenades. What made them great was how each of them were actually effective on certain enemies, like the EMP-style EC grenades, which stun and hurt the droids, or the flash grenades stunning the organic enemies. The sonic grenades were also pretty handy as a detonate on impact-style grenade, especially since they destroyed enemies on mounted turrets. They're pretty powerful, all things considered, but I like how each grenade has a specific use case that can turn the tide of a particular battle, and I kind of wish FPS games employed a similar rock-paper-scissors style grenade arsenal. I do think the age of the gameplay is very noticeable, especially when you consider how simple the tactical portion of the game is. Since squadmate weapon usage is dependent on the positional commands, they don't really make use of it until such a time comes up, and will always default to shooting with their blaster. That's also the extent of their complexity, and there's not much else that they really do. But it's honestly more than fine for this game's scope, and the fact that they are extremely efficient at carrying out their commands, which is more than I could ask for in an older title such as this. The door breaching mechanic does feel a bit underwhelming to go back to though. Sure, it looked really cool for its time in entering a room with a grenade and blasting the enemies to death, but it sucks that the other option of slicing a door and going in quietly is honestly not that effective or even worth it most of the time. The game signposts you to slice certain doors on different occasions because you know ahead of time what's on the other side. But it honestly would have been more fun and impactful if there were always advantages and disadvantages to using either method. That way, it adds more emergent gameplay for the player to handle. Maybe something to consider if a remake were in the works. Enemy variety was pretty fun for the most part, but it did feel a little underwhelming in the third act as it basically consisted of the first and second act enemies all just mixed together. It also didn't help that some of the level designs for the encounters and area engagements felt extremely repetitive. By the end, it was a bit tedious to repeatedly go into a room and set up to defeat a bunch of different enemies, with little to no difference in the environment or situation. On the occasion where it tasks you to slice a terminal or plant a bomb, yes, those situations were fun, but clearing a room full of fodder enemies was the more repetitive scenario. As far as the overall gameplay is concerned, it was still a blast to go through again, especially when the game has some really smart and intentional mechanics that make the squad aspect feel important. But by the end, I did wish there were more. More enemy types and situations that emphasize the squad gameplay, more options for commands to give the squad, and just more, better designed levels to go through. Honestly, all these wants are just me begging for the game to have a remake, because the gameplay alone, along with some improvements and modern furnishings, would make for such an amazing game for today's market, especially one for Star Wars. If you like a very simple but command-emphasized tactical style approach, along with a good variety of weapons to handle the game's tougher enemies, then Republic Commando will still feel good in that regard. But I wouldn't blame you if its level design, structure, and overall length doesn't quite cut it for you. Also, I do recall playing the multiplayer mode for maybe 1 or 2 matches before I kinda stopped caring, but I heard that it was generally alright, and most of the attention was better left for the single player portion. If anyone has any thoughts on the multiplayer, feel free to leave a comment.
I'm too old for this shit.
Republic Commando's 2005 graphics are indeed old. Going off the more technical aspects of the game, the models and some of the environment are very polygonal. It's very indicative of the 6th generation period of gaming that occurred when 3D models started to get a lot better with their animation and rigging, and shadows started to become the new cool thing in graphics. But still a little rough with their texturing and not quite as realistic. Republic Commando isn't bad per se, and I vividly remember it looking amazing for its time. But modern resolution viewing makes the game feel its age. That said, as far as the actual artistic approach and aesthetic of the game goes, this is as Clone Wars era as it gets. Granted, you're mainly seeing Clone Commandos for 80% of the game, but the Clone Trooper vibe, Star Wars themed spaceships, aliens, and environments are all there to make you know what Republic Commando is all about. Fans of the series will recognize the super battle droids, droidicas, inside jokes.
An elegant weapon for a more civilized time, huh? Well, guess what? Times have changed.
And everyone's favorite, not from the movies because I still kinda disliked his weak depiction and has a more awesome cartoon appearance, General Grievous. The depiction of the Clone Commandos look pretty cool, and while most troopers tend to have armor that pretty much look all the same, the different styles that Delta Squad have used to color their armor make them stand out amongst each other, even with different equipment that each squad member carries. I think immersion is still the game's strongest point with the aesthetic. I appreciate the fact that it uses in-game textures and environments for its scenes, as well as keeping everything from the perspective of Delta Lead. There's never a moment where the camera is shot from the audience or a cutscene is used for the sake of story. Everything takes place from the eyes of 38, and I always thought that was the best part about the game's presentation, especially the visor. The HUD, the corners of the helmet, and your information display are all very sci-fi and Clone Trooper appropriate for the aesthetic. The visor even wipes off blood and debris that can get on your screen. Also, it miraculously cleans off bullet holes. The sound is still pretty good too. It's not quite as high definition or clear sounding in its sources, but it still manages to sound, well, Star Wars-y as ever. Everything from blaster fire the droid speaking,
Leave a mark.
it's the sound effects that help cement the fact that you are in a Star Wars setting. The music is definitely iconic. It uses some abridged versions of the John Williams pieces that are used in the Star Wars films, but also has its own pieces that are thematically similar but fit the more military approach of the game. Now you'll have to look up some of these tracks as DMCA might kill this section of the video, but they are very good pieces that fit the game's mood and vibe, and the original scores will definitely bring some nostalgia for some fans. The voice acting is pretty good as far as banter type conversations go. As mentioned before, the personalities of Delta Squad are a very rambunctious type, and Sev, Scorch, Fixer all bring their own fun personalities to the table.
Someone important noted your excellence on Geonosis. You hear that, Sev? Someone thinks I'm excellent.
Well, at least that makes 2 of you.
This place gives me the creeps. What are these strange egg-like things?
Looks like we're in some sort of Geonosian birthing chamber, gentlemen.
What do you know? They are eggs.
Give them a wide berth.
Just when you think they can't get any more disgusting.
There's also some nice Clone Commando accents from a few characters, and I think it's often described as New Zealandish accent, correct me if I'm wrong, due to Tamura Morrison playing Jango Fett in the films.
Your first objective is to find him and link up. The squad objective remains. Find Sun Fac and eliminate him. I will be issuing further orders as you go. Good luck, Commando.
Personal favorite inclusion, though, is Tamura Morrison himself lending his voice to 3-8. This time around, and at least to what I can recall, he has a more characteristic and leader-like voice that really befits 3-8, compared to his more Jango Fett or even Boba Fett personality.
Whoever stole the ship has done some redecorating, Deltas. The aft data core access hole is blocked by debris.
Hope you feel like a good crawl, sir. The only way around that area is through the droid access conduits.
Lovely.
You might have to slice your way in.
Both a perfect fit and a fun cameo for the fans, and honestly, I can't picture anyone else playing Delta lead other than Morrison. A bit old, but a solid presentation nonetheless, and you can tell Republic Commando is a Star Wars game to a T. I think for what it's worth, and despite the age, the game trying to make you feel like you're part of the Star Wars universe, and more specifically being a Clone Commando, is definitely the strongest aspect about it. Of course, whether you care for this stuff is subjective, and your patience with older looking graphics as well. But it's still overall a fun and thematic Star Wars presentation that I really enjoyed. While the game is starting to show its age, it's still cool to see some of the parts that make Republic Commando unique. A band of Clone Commando brothers fighting side by side, the tactical genes of one of the most feared bounty hunters in the galaxy, all together facing impossible odds. It's one hell of a Star Wars campaign that understands its roots and makes it meaningful for the fans. Not to mention, it was a pretty solid game for its time. Sure, based on the contents alone, while there are parts that make it feel unique as a tactical FPS, some of the things that it lacks may not be enough for a modern day playthrough, and it'll likely be more of a game that the nostalgia heads will appreciate. But if you're willing to work with it, it's still an amazingly fun, tight-knit squad-style game to play through. I think most of all, it honestly has the biggest potential to be one of the best possible remakes, or something along the lines of a sequel. It's one of the rare single-player Star Wars games that doesn't primarily involve the Jedi Order and makes for an interesting military story in its own universe. Plus, it's kind of one of the only few sci-fi tactical single-player FPS games that comes to mind, and there's really nothing else that feels close to it. Please comment if I'm wrong on this assumption. A great game with some unique mechanics that made the retro playthrough worth it, and one with some amazing remake potential. Or a sequel, that works too. But that's gonna do it for today, guys. Thanks for sticking around. There will be more games to play and more videos coming soon, so please stay tuned if you'd like to see more. But for now, I'll see you all next time.